Usually when we talk about like a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of precision,
Right, yeah.
It's like engineering or something. You break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line,
Yeah.
and the doctor just points at the film and says, there it is, there's the problem.
It's very binary. Broken or not broken, you can physically point to the point failure, which, well, it brings a certain psychological comfort, I think.
Totally.
We crave visibility when things go wrong. We want things categorized neatly.
But then you step into the world of neurodevelopment or sleep disorders or psychological trauma, and suddenly that x-ray machine is just useless.
Completely useless, yeah.
You're looking at a diagnostic landscape that is entirely murky. You have symptoms, you have fears, you have night terrors, but you can't point to a single broken bone.
Right.
And that shift going from the clean and understandable into the murky, the terrifying, the deeply misunderstood, that is the foundational theme of what we are unpacking today.
It really is.
Because we are doing a singular, hyper-focused exploration for you today on one of the most enigmatic figures in the Pokemon universe. We are tearing into the lore of Darkrai.
Which is, frankly, an incredibly ambitious subject.
Yeah.
Because the sources we have spanning this creature's existence are just massively diverse.
Oh, they are all over the place.
Yeah, we aren't just looking at a few Pokedex entries here. We are synthesizing extensive fan-compiled mythologies, deep documentation of competitive battling history, like the actual mathematics of tiering policies, specific in-game lore spanning from Generation 4 all the way to the newly detailed legends, ZA Mega Dimension DLC,
Right.
and even raw code analysis regarding obscure technical glitches from the Glitch City Wiki.
It is a massive tapestry. I mean, we're talking medieval medical anomalies, tragic cinematic heroism, dictatorial mind control and spin-offs, and literal tears in the fabric of the video game's programming code.
It goes deep.
It really does. But before we step off the edge into that abyss, a quick shout out. If you are the kind of person who loves unraveling the shadows of gaming, dissecting the lore that developers hide in plain sight, just like we are doing today, you absolutely need to check out the channel Decoding the Dark.
They're great.
So great. It's the perfect companion to this deep dive. They do incredible work analyzing the exact kind of hidden, terrifying narratives we're about to explore today.
So to begin, we need to establish the baseline of what this creature actually represents.
Right, the basics.
Yeah, if you play the games casually or if you've seen the anime, Darkrai is broadly understood as the nightmare Pokemon.
Yeah.
It is the franchise's designated bogeyman.
The guy hiding under the bed.
Exactly. But the etymology and the physical design of this character go far deeper than just a spooky ghost that gives you bad dreams.
Well, let's start with the name, Darkrai. On the surface, it just sounds, ominous, like a villain's name in a Saturday morning cartoon.
Right.
But the linguistic breakdown in the source material reveals a lot of intent from the creators.
It's a carefully constructed portmanteau. The first half is obviously the English word dark, but the second half, the suffix rai, has two distinct linguistic origins that researchers point to. And both of them operate simultaneously in the lore.
Okay, so what's the first one?
The first is the Japanese word kurai, which literally translates to dark or gloomy.
Which makes the name completely redundant. Dark.
Essentially, yes, it acts as an absolute emphasis. It isn't just a shadow cast by an object, it is the absence of light entirely.
Wow.
But the secondary root of Ray is derived from Hindi, where Ray translates to king.
The King of Darkness. See, that changes the context entirely for me. A shadow is a passive thing. A king implies sovereignty, control, and a domain.
Yes, exactly.
It sets up the idea that Darkrai doesn't just inhabit the dark, it rules it. And that ties directly into its official classification in the Pokedex. It isn't categorized as the Dark Pokemon, it is officially the Pitch-Black Pokemon. And I really want to pause on that word, pitch.
It's a very specific descriptor, isn't it? Most people use pitch black just as a colloquialism for very dark, but historically, pitch is a physical substance.
Right. Pitch is wood tar. It's this highly viscous, incredibly sticky black polymer historically used in shipbuilding to waterproof wooden hulls. If you've ever touched real pitch, you know it is impossible to get off. It clings to everything.
It does.
And the sources point out that this is a deliberate metaphor for the kind of darkness Darkrai represents. It isn't an optical illusion. It's thick. It's palpable. It is a darkness that sticks to your skin, much like a severe nightmare that leaves you sweating and terrified long after you've woken up in your bed. It's an inescapable environmental hazard.
And that concept of an inescapable creeping hazard brings us to the visual design, specifically a physiological detail that drastically alters how we should perceive this creature.
Oh man, this part got to me.
Darkrai has a very distinct silhouette. It has an impossibly thin hourglass waist, broad shoulders, and a tattered, ghostly black cloak that seems to billow around it even when there is no wind. Because it is almost always depicted levitating, it registers in our brains as a specter, a ghost.
But it isn't a ghost. And this is the detail that completely ruined my sleep when I read it in the source notes. Underneath that patterned floating cloak, Darkrai actually possesses legs.
The stilt legs.
Yes, it has these incredibly long, spindly, retractable stilt legs. When it decides to stop levitating, it can deploy these legs and walk on the ground with a very pronounced humanoid gait.
The reason that detail is so unsettling lies in the psychology of the uncanny valley.
Absolutely.
A floating shadow is a known mythological trope. We understand how to categorize a ghost, but when a floating, amorphous shadow suddenly extends physical, anatomical legs and begins striding toward you like a tall human being, it shatters the rules of its own existence.
Yeah, it becomes real.
Right, it transitions from an ethereal fear to a physical, immediate threat.
I picture it like, okay, you're walking down an alley at midnight, you see a shadow floating at the end of the street. Terrifying, sure, but then it drops down onto these stilt legs and starts speed walking towards you.
That's horrifying.
That is pure, visceral horror, and it aligns perfectly with the mythological roots Game Freak pulled from to create it. We aren't just looking at generic ghost stories here. The sources trace Darkrai directly back to Greco-Roman mythology.
Specifically to the Roman poet Ovid and his masterwork, the Metamorphoses.
Okay.
In Roman mythology, the god of sleep is Somnus. Somnus has several sons who are the bringers of dreams. One of these sons is Phobetor. Phobetor is the literal divine personification of nightmares.
Wow.
When humans have night terrors, it is because Phobetor has entered their dreamscape, explicitly taking the shape of frightening beasts, monsters, or serpents. He is the shadow in the sleep.
Which is fascinating because Phobetor doesn't work alone. He has a brother.
Yes, Morpheus. Morpheus is the shaper of dreams, the one who brings prophetic, soothing, or human-shaped visions to sleepers. And this mythological duality is perfectly mirrored in the Pokemon universe.
Right.
If Darkrai is Phobetor, the bringer of beasts and night terrors, then Morpheus is undeniably Cresselia.
The lunar duo. Cresselia is literally a psychic swan creature that radiates light and leaves behind lunar wings that cure bad dreams.
They are two sides of a singular ecological coin. They represent the phases of the moon and the human circadian rhythm. Cresselia is the full moon, the apex of light in the dark, offering restorative sleep. Darkrai is the new moon, the total eclipse of light, bringing the natural, necessary counterbalance of fear.
But the developers didn't stop at highbrow Roman poetry.
No, they did not.
They also dug into the gritty, unhygienic terror of the Middle Ages. If you look at Darkrai's head, it has this flowing, wispy, stark white mane. It looks almost like a jagged cloud, and it perpetually covers one of its blue eyes.
Right.
The inspiration for this hair isn't just an anime styling choice. It is grounded in a real medieval medical condition called the Polish plate.
In German medical literature of the time, it was known as Wichtelzopf.
Okay, Pixelzopf.
The Polish plate, or plica polonica, is a very real, though now incredibly rare, disease of the hair shaft. Due to a combination of poor hygiene, severe scalp conditions, and the accumulation of dirt and sweat, a person's hair would become irreversibly matted. It would fuse together into a sticky, hard, foul-smelling mass that could not be brushed out. It essentially formed a solid biological dreadlock.
And you have to put yourself in the shoes of a peasant in the 14th century. Medical science basically consists of leeches and prayer.
Pretty much.
You go to sleep with normal hair, and over a few weeks, you keep waking up with your hair twisting into this rotting, foul-smelling knot. You don't understand sebaceous gland buildup. You need a narrative to explain why this is happening to your body.
Human psychology abhors a vacuum of explanation.
Exactly.
Without dermatological science, the medieval mind turns to the supernatural. The prevailing folklore was that nightmares, which at the time didn't mean a bad dream, but rather literal evil spirits, hags, or ghoulish undead called wights, were sneaking into homes in the dead of night.
So creepy.
People believed these creatures were physically sitting on the chests of sleepers, suffocating them, and tangling their hair into these knots.
Hence the German name, Wichtelzopf, the Weiss plate, the knot made by the goblin. I find it absolutely brilliant from a game design perspective. Game Freak took a historical medical misunderstanding, a literal projection of human ignorance and terror, and personified it.
It's very clever.
They took the Polish plate, the hair tangled by a nightmare demon, and made it the actual hair of their nightmare demon. This perfect closed loop of folklore.
It condenses centuries of human anxiety into a physical entity that stands exactly 1.5 meters tall and weighs 50.5 kilograms. It is the physical embodiment of the boogeyman, bearing the tangible scars of the night terrors it inflicts.
So we have established a creature that is linguistically, physically, and historically engineered to be the ultimate villain. It looks like a demon. It is named the King of Darkness. It walks on unnatural stilts and has hair made of medieval rot. But here is the massive narrative pivot. When you actually look at how Darkrai behaves in the core story of the universe, it completely subverts all of that horrifying setup.
It creates a fascinating dichotomy between a creature's biological nature and its conscious intent. If we look at the core Generation 4 games, Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum, we find Darkrai residing on New Moon Island.
Right.
New Moon Island is a small, barren rock, geographically mirroring Cresselia's Full Moon Island. But Darkrai is not there marshaling an army of shadows to take over the Sonic region.
No, it's just sitting there, alone.
It is entirely isolated. And the reason for this isolation is tied to its signature biological ability, known in the game mechanics as bad dreams.
Right.
This ability inherently and involuntarily causes severe nightmares to any sleeping creature within Darkrai's vicinity. It operates much like a field of radiation. But the in-game lore, specifically the Pokédex entries and NPC dialogue, makes it explicitly clear Darkrai does not do this out of malice.
Right, it's a defense mechanism. It's an involuntary aura.
Precisely. Or rather, to put it in ecological terms, it's akin to a poisoned dart frog skin or a skunk's scent gland. It casts these nightmares to deter predators and keep other living things away.
Okay.
Darkrai understands that its very presence inflicts psychological torture on humans and Pokemon alike. Therefore, it places itself in a self-imposed quarantine on New Moon Island. It banishes itself to the edge of the world to protect the world from its own passive existence.
Let me push back on how fans usually interpret this, though. A lot of the fandom frames Darkrai as this tragic superhero, like, oh, look at this noble martyr isolating himself for the greater good.
Yes, that's a common read.
But I think that projects a human morality onto a creature that operates on ecological instinct. It isn't a superhero who happens to radiate lethal radiation. It's a biological hazard that has found an ecological niche where it causes the least amount of friction.
That's a fair point.
It stays on New Moon Island because contact with others results in chaos. It's less heroic sacrifice and more necessary containment.
That is a very grounded way to look at it.
Yeah.
It removes the romanticism and looks at the mechanics of its survival. However, the franchise itself did heavily lean into that romantic, heroic martyr narrative during Darkrai's cinematic debut in the movie The Rise of Darkrai.
Okay, yes, the movie absolutely paints it as a superhero. If you haven't seen The Rise of Darkrai, the plot is apocalyptic. You have these two cosmic deities, Dialga, the god of time, and Palkia, the god of space.
Right.
They get into a massive, reality-rending turf war in the dimensional rift between their realms. And the collateral damage of their fighting starts to physically tear apart a localized area in the real world called Alamos Town.
And because human nature is predictable, the residents of Alamos Town experience these terrifying spatial distortions. They look around and they see Darkrai, a pitch-black floating entity known for causing nightmares, and they immediately scapegoat it.
They form an angry mob, they assume the boogeyman is destroying their home, but the reality is that Darkrai is the only thing standing between them and total annihilation.
Okay.
The movie reveals this beautiful backstory. Decades prior, Darkrai was injured, and a human woman named Alicia found it in the town's garden. Instead of screaming or running away, she showed it basic compassion. She let it rest in the garden. And because of that single act of kindness, Darkrai essentially swore a blood oath to protect the town and Alicia's descendants.
It highlights a deep emotional permanence in the creature. When the gods of space and time arrive and begin erasing Alamos Town from reality, Darkrai doesn't flee. It actively engages these two supreme deities in combat.
And it is so outmatched.
Horribly outmatched. But it continues to throw itself between their attacks to shield the town's central tower. Ultimately, Darkrai takes a combined attack from both gods, which literally disintegrates it into dust. It sacrifices its life to buy the human protagonists enough time to soothe the deities.
It's a massive tearjerker. The monster born from the fear of the dark becomes the savior of humanity. It's a complete exoneration of Darkrai's character. But, and this is where the lore gets really muddy, the video games don't let us stay in that comfortable heroic space. Because while the anime movie says Darkrai is just misunderstood, the core games step in and remind us that a biological hazard is still a hazard. And this brings us to the Strange House.
Yes. If we move forward in the timeline to Generation 5, specifically Pokemon Black 2 and White 2, we encounter a piece of environmental storytelling that violently shatters the purely heroic narrative. In these games, the player can explore a location called the Strange House, situated near Reversal Mountain.
Strange House is underselling it. It is a straight-up haunted house.
It really is.
Furniture moves on its own, the lighting is incredibly oppressive, and there is no background music, just this eerie silence. And as you navigate this maze-like house, you encounter the ghost of a young girl.
The game doesn't explicitly hand you a document explaining what happened to her, but you piece it together through the ghost's cryptic dialogue and the objects left in the house. The historical context reveals a devastating reality. This young girl was trapped in an endless, inescapable nightmare.
A nightmare caused by Darkrai, and she didn't just wake up in a cold sweat.
No, she never woke up.
Wow.
The dialogue implies that her parents desperately traveled the region searching for a lunar wing the feather from Cresselia that acts as the sole cure for Darkrai's bad dreams ability. But they were too late.
Oh, man.
The girl's physical body gave out from the sheer neurological stress of the unending terror. She passed away in her sleep. She died because she was exposed to Darkrai's passive power for too long.
That is heavy. That is incredibly dark for a franchise ostensibly aimed at kids. It completely reframes the tragedy of Darkrai, because it forces us to accept that intent doesn't matter when the outcome is lethal.
Right?
Darkrai can be as noble as it wants, it can quarantine itself on Newman Island, but if a child wanders too close, the collateral damage isn't a bad night's sleep, it is fatal. It operates as this cosmic necessity, the shadow that makes Cresselia's light possible. But connection for Darkrai fundamentally means death for others.
It leaves Darkrai in a state of permanent, tragic stasis in the core games. It is a necessary evil that desperately wishes it wasn't evil.
Which is a heartbreaking place to leave the character.
Yeah.
But we're going to take a brief pause here, because when we come back, we're going to dive into the sources that ask a very different question. What happens when Darkrai gets tired of being the tragic victim, stops isolating itself, and decides to actively weaponize its terrifying power?
It was quite the shift.
It really is. But before we explore the absolute villainy of the spin-off games, a quick reminder. If you are hooked on uncovering the hidden truths, the paradoxes, and the dark lore of your favorite media, you have to subscribe to the channel Decoding the Dark. They thrive on exactly this kind of deep, analytical mystery. Check out Decoding the Dark today.
Highly recommend them.
Okay, so we've established Darkrai as this isolated, tragic figure who accidentally kills people in the core RPG titles and sacrifices itself in the movies. But the source material notes a massive tonal shift when we look at the franchise's spin-off games.
Yes, the writers for the spin-off titles clearly looked at Darkrai's kit, the ability to control dreams, induce paralysis, and manipulate shadows, and realized that this is the perfect toolkit for a mastermind antagonist. They strip away the misunderstood Defender label entirely.
And nowhere is this more prevalent than in the Pokemon Mystery Dungeon series. Specifically, the legendary titles Explorers of Time, Explorers of Darkness, and Explorers of Sky. If you know, you know. The twist in this game is iconic.
It is. In the overarching narrative of Explorers, the world is facing total temporal collapse. The temporal tower, which regulates the flow of time, is being sabotaged. This sabotage eventually leads to a dark future, a dystopian timeline where time is completely frozen, the sun never rises, and the world is trapped in a state of eternal paralysis and shadow.
Right.
The player and their partners spend the entire game trying to prevent this collapse.
And for 90% of the game, you think the villain is Gravile, or maybe the corrupted god of time Primal Dialga. But in the post-game, after you've saved the world, the real mastermind steps out of the shadows, and it's Darkrai.
Darkrai is revealed as the master architect behind the entire planetary collapse. He don't just want to cause a few nightmares. His goal was to plunge the entire planet into a never-ending paralyzed darkness so that he could rule over it as an absolute monarch. He leans fully into the King of Darkness translation of his name.
And the most vindictive part of the lore is his connection to the player character. In Mystery Dungeon, the player starts as a human who gets turned into a Pokemon and wakes up with total amnesia.
Right.
It turns out, Darkrai is the one who did that.
Yeah.
The player and Graviel were originally time travelers trying to stop him. Darkrai intercepted them in the time stream and attacked them, causing the player to lose their memory and mutate into a Pokemon.
What is particularly fascinating about this iteration of Darkrai is his personality profile. He is not portrayed as a towering, brave conqueror. He is a cowardly, brilliant manipulator. He avoids direct confrontation at all costs.
He's sneaky.
Very. He operates purely through psychological warfare. At one point, he even invades the dreams of the player's partner, creating a flawless illusion of Cresselia, and uses this fake Cresselia to try and convince the player that their very existence is destroying the world, urging them to commit suicide to save it.
That is incredibly messed up. It's pure, calculated malice. He is gaslighting the protagonists using their greatest fears and trusted allies. And we see a different flavor of this manipulative, dictatorial behavior in another spin-off game, Pokepark 2. Wonders Beyond.
Pokepark 2 presents a slightly more nuanced take on his villainy. In this game, Darkrai creates an alternate dimension known as Wish Park. He uses this dimension to lure Pokemon away from the real world. He promises them a utopia, a place of eternal play, endless food, and fun.
But it's a trap.
Exactly. The reality is that once they enter Wish Park, they are trapped in a hypnotic, dreamlike stasis, serving essentially as his captive audience.
But there is a twist here, right? Because even when Darkrai is acting like a kidnapping dictator, the writers still inject that tragic undertone we saw in the core games.
Precisely. As the plot unfolds, it is revealed that Darkrai's motivations were not entirely born of malice. A massive destructive phenomenon called the Dark Vortex was expanding, threatening to consume both the real world and Pokepark.
Okay.
Darkrai calculated that the impending destruction was inevitable. Therefore, he believed the only way to save the Pokemon was to lock them away in the safe, frozen stasis of Wish Park.
It's the ultimate extreme of a protective instinct gone wrong. Like, I will save you from the end of the world by imprisoning you in a sensory deprivation chamber forever. It's an authoritarian logic.
It is a dictatorial version of protection, completely devoid of free will. And when his plan fails and the Dark Vortex finally breaches his dimension and threatens to tear everything apart, Darkrai experiences a moment of clarity. Much like his counterpart in the Alamos Town movie, he realizes his methodology was flawed.
So what does he do?
To correct his mistake, he physically throws himself into the black hole of the vortex, sacrificing himself to seal the breach and save the dimension.
Though thankfully for the kids playing Pokepark 2, the postgame lets you recruit the legendary dragons Reshiram and Zekrom to dive into the black hole and pull Darkrai back out, so he doesn't have to stay dead this time.
Yes, a slightly happier ending there.
But speaking of Darkrai, showing up in unexpected places and completely upending the narrative rules of the universe, we have to talk about the anime. We have to talk about the Sinnoh League. Let's dig into Tobias.
Tobias. This is perhaps one of the most heavily debated and controversial pieces of lore within the entire Pokemon anime community. Our sources dedicate significant space to the fan theories surrounding this character because his existence is a narrative anomaly.
For context, if you aren't familiar with the Diamond and Pearl seasons of the anime, Ash Ketchum is having the tournament run of his life. He's built an incredible team. He's finally defeated his bitter rival, Paul, in a beautifully animated, emotionally resonant battle, and he advances to the semifinals of the Sinnoh League.
He's right at the finish line.
The regional championship is within his grasp. And then he faces a trainer named Tobias.
Tobias is introduced with almost no backstory. He is a tall, incredibly stoic man with long hair that perpetually covers one eye, much like Darkrai's mane. He wears a flowing, dark poncho. And he doesn't just battle well, he is a statistical impossibility.
He sweeps the entire regional tournament, every single battle leading up to the semifinals, using only one Pokemon, a Darkrai.
In the context of the anime's universe, mythical Pokemon like Darkrai are considered legends, almost gods. For a random human trainer to casually possess one, let alone command it with absolute authority, breaks the established verisimilitude of the world.
Ash throws his entire team at this Darkrai and farly manages to knock it out. And what does Tobias do? He casually reaches to his belt and sends out a Latios, a legendary psychic dragon.
That's absurd.
He crushes the rest of Ash's team, goes on to win the finals off-screen, and then vanishes. He's never mentioned in the anime again, no Elite Four challenge, no champion title defense. He just evaporates.
Which is what fuels the Tobias conspiracy detailed in the sources. The narrative dissonance is so loud that fans refuse to accept him as just a really strong trainer. The theory posits a radical reinterpretation of the events. Tobias is not a human trainer who caught a Darkrai. Tobias is the Darkrai.
The Darkrai avatar theory, and honestly, I completely buy into this. The theory connects back to the Alamos Town movie. In that movie, Darkrai sacrifices itself to save the town from Dialga and Palkia. The theory suggests that Arceus, the literal creator god of the Pokemon universe, witnessed this sacrifice.
Right.
Arceus resurrects Darkrai and grants it a reward, the ability to experience the world not as a feared, isolated monster, but as a human.
It creates a compelling narrative, though. Arceus gives Darkrai a human shell. This perfectly explains Tobias's aesthetic, which is heavily coded to look like Darkrai's silhouette. It explains why he only utilizes mythical and legendary Pokemon because, as a mythical entity himself, he naturally associates with his peers, like Latios, rather than common wild Pokemon.
That makes total sense.
And crucially, it explains his disappearance. He didn't want to rule the region as champion. He just wanted to experience the thrill of the ultimate human competition. Once the tournament concluded, the Avatar was no longer needed, and he returned to his true form.
That's a beautiful narrative, but I know you're going to tell me there's a more clinical explanation for how he did it without divine intervention.
Well, we can ground this theory in the established biological capabilities of the Pokemon without needing to invoke Arceus. If we review Darkrai's Pokédex entries across multiple generations, we see a recurring theme: extreme reality manipulation within its nightmare fields. Darkrai has the psychic capacity to alter perception, induce mass hallucinations, and project physical manifestations of thoughts.
So you're saying Tobias is essentially a very complicated hologram.
A sustained, highly advanced psychic projection, yes. Darkrai wishes to participate in the Sinnoh League to test its strength. However, it knows that a wild nightmare demon entering a stadium would cause mass panic, activate its involuntary bad dreams ability, and potentially kill the spectators.
That would be bad.
Very bad. So it remains hidden, perhaps deep in the catacombs under the stadium, and psychically projects the avatar of Tobias. This avatar registers as human to the referees, issues commands to Darkrai itself, and calls upon its ally, Latios. Once the tournament is won, Darkrai drops the projection and flies away. The trainer never existed.
I love that so much. It takes a writing decision that fans absolutely hated. Let's just introduce an unbeatable guy with cheat code Pokemon so Ash loses again, and turns it into this profound, deeply hidden layer of world building. Darkrai bends the rules of the anime universe by manifesting a human to win a trophy.
And bending rules is where Darkrai excels, because as we transition into the next segment of our sources, we see that Darkrai didn't just break the narrative rules of the anime, it literally shattered the mathematical code of the physical video games.
Yes, this is where we pivot from story lore to the real-world technical history of Generation 4. We have to talk about one of those infamous programming exploits in gaming history. We have to talk about the Void Glitch. We have to talk about tweaking.
To fully grasp the magnitude of the Void Glitch, we need to understand the hardware limitations of the Nintendo DS, the console on which Diamond and Pearl were released in 2006. The Sinnoh region in the game is vast, but the DS had a very limited amount of random access memory, or RAM.
Right.
It was mathematically impossible for the console to load the entire map of Sinnoh into memory simultaneously.
So the developers had to use a trick to make the world feel seamless without melting the console.
Exactly. The developers divided the entire map of Sinnoh into an invisible grid. Each square on this grid was comprised of 32 by 32 tiles. The game's engine was programmed to only ever hold a few of these squares in the RAM at any given time, the square the player is currently standing in, and the immediate adjacent squares.
So as you walk north, the game is quietly deleting the town to the south out of its memory and silently loading the trees and roads to the north before you can see them on screen. It's a treadmill effect.
It is a brilliantly efficient system, assuming the player moves at a predictable speed. Walking, running, or even riding the standard bicycle gears gives the engine plenty of time to execute this memory swap. The invisible loading zones, the boundary lines between the grids are crossed smoothly, but players are inherently curious, and they found a way to outpace the treadmill.
Because in Generation 4, the bicycle had a unique mechanic. You could shift it into a fourth gear that allowed for incredibly rapid, sustained movement, and players figured out a technique called tweaking or hole punching.
The mathematics of tweaking are remarkably precise. Players discovered that if they rode the bicycle in fourth gear, moving at maximum speed in a very specific rapid zigzag pattern exactly over the geometric intersection where 4 map grids meet a corner of the squares, they could overwhelm the console's processing queue.
I like to picture it like a museum. The game engine is the curator. Usually you walk from room to room and the curator has time to hang the paintings on the wall before you walk in.
Okay, I like this analogy.
But tweaking is like you strapping on rollerblades, bursting through the door, spinning in a circle, and sprinting into the next room before the curator even knows you're in the building. The curator panics, drops the paintings, and you run into a room that has no walls, no floor, and no ceiling.
That is an excellent mechanistic analogy. The game's processor receives too many conflicting directional inputs simultaneously while crossing the load lines. The game asks, is the player in square A, B, C, or D? The CPU maxes out, fails to compute the answer in time, and to prevent a hard crash, it defaults to loading nothing.
Wow.
The graphics fail to render, the collision data fails to load, the physical environment of the Sinnoh region simply ceases to exist, replaced by a literal, infinite black abyss. This is the void.
And this wasn't just a visual glitch where your screen goes black for a second. The game still thought you were playing. You could physically step your character into the blackness. You could ride your bike off the rendered map of the game and into the raw, unrendered matrix of the game's code.
And the motivation for players doing this, risking their game cartridges, was entirely centered on Darkrai. In the code of Diamond and Pearl, Darkrai existed. It was programmed to reside on New Moon Island. However, it was an event-exclusive mythical Pokémon.
Meaning you couldn't catch it just by playing the game normally. You had to physically drive to a GameStop or a Toys R Us during a specific 2-week promotional window, connect your DS to a distribution cartridge, and download a digital item called the Member Card. And Game Freak didn't release the Member Card again for years after the game launched.
The data was locked on the cartridge, tantalizingly out of reach, so the community weaponized the void. Through painstaking trial and error, reverse engineering the coordinate system of the Sinnoh map, players mapped out a route through the abyss.
That's dedication.
They realized that if they entered the void at a specific location in Jubilife City, they could manually walk through the unrendered code all the way to the specific coordinates of New Moon Island.
But walking through the void was akin to defusing a bomb. It wasn't just pointing your D-pad north and holding the button down.
It was an exercise in extreme RAM manipulation. The void isn't empty, it is a visual representation of garbage data and raw memory. If you loaded the wrong sector of code by stepping out of bounds, the game would try to read invalid data.
And what happens when it does that?
Catastrophic failure. The game would freeze. Or worse, it would trigger the infamous black screen of death. This meant the corrupted hexadecimal values had overwritten your save file block in the cartridge's memory. When you turned the DS back on, your save file was gone. Hundreds of hours of gameplay permanently erased.
So the community created these insanely complex turn-by-turn instruction manuals. It read like a bizarre pirate map. Take exactly 415 steps north, do not take 416, turn east and take 22 steps. Open your Pokédex to force the graphics to refresh, walk 100 steps south.
It was meticulous.
You were essentially programming the game's memory state using your character's footsteps. And if your finger slipped on the D-pad once, your game died.
The meta-narrative here is staggeringly poetic. Darkrai is the Pitch-Black Pokémon. It is the master of nightmares, isolation, and the terrifying unknown, and in order to capture it without the official event, human players had to literally tear a hole in the fabric of their digital reality, step into an endless, terrifying black abyss, conquer their fear of total destruction, losing their save file, and navigate the dark to find the King of Darkness waiting for them.
Amazing.
The game developers accidentally designed the most thematic, terrifying quest possible.
It is my favorite piece of Pokemon history. The players loved Darkrai enough to risk their save files. But as we turn to the competitive battling side of the source material, we find that the actual developers at Game Freak ended up creating a real-world nightmare for Darkrai that completely ruined its viability. We have to talk about the tragedy of Dark Void and the absolute menace that is Smeargle.
To comprehend this tragedy, we must first break down the mechanics of Darkrai's signature move, Dark Void. In the mathematical ecosystem of competitive Pokemon, status conditions dictate the flow of battle. And sleep is arguably the most powerful status condition.
Because it completely removes player agency. If your Pokemon is asleep, it cannot attack, it cannot use items, it just sits there for 1 to 3 turns absorbing damage.
Exactly. To balance this overwhelming advantage, the game designers traditionally make sleep-inducing moves highly unreliable. The move Hypnosis, for example, only has a 60% base accuracy. Using it is a desperate gamble. But Dark Void was an anomaly. It was a dark-type move that inflicted sleep, and it boasted an incredible 80% accuracy.
8 out of 10 times your opponent is neutralized.
But the true terror of Dark Void was realized in the VGC format. The video game championships are the official, sanctioned tournaments run by the Pokémon Company. Unlike the single-player campaigns, VGC is played exclusively in a double battle format. 2 Pokémon on your side, 2 on your opponent's side, and Dark Void was programmed to target both opposing Pokémon simultaneously.
An 80% chance to put both of your opponent's monsters to sleep on turn 1. Mathematically, that is a win condition. If you hit that, the battle is essentially over.
Now, initially, this overpowered mechanic did not disrupt the VGC ecosystem because Darkrai is a mythical Pokémon. Under official VGC rules, mythical Pokémon are permanently banned from competition. They are relegated to the Ubers tier in unofficial formats, alongside box art legendary gods like Mewtwo and Rayquaza. Game Freak likely assumed that because Darkrai could never enter an official tournament, balancing Dark Void wasn't a priority.
Let the kids have fun with their overpowered nightmare ghost in the story mode. That was the logic. But they forgot about a loophole. They forgot about a little painting dog. They forgot about Smeargle.
Smeargle is a normal-type Pokémon introduced in Generation 2. Statistically, it is incredibly weak. Its base stats, the underlying numbers that determine how much damage a Pokémon can take or deal, are abysmal. A standard Pokémon might have a base attack of 100. Smeargle's is 20. It cannot win a fight. However, it possesses a unique, defining move called Sketch.
Sketch allows Smeargle to permanently copy almost any move used by another Pokémon in the game.
And competitive players are nothing if not ruthlessly optimizing. They realized that while Darkrai was banned from entering the VGC tournaments, Smeargle was not. A player could simply enter a casual battle against a friend using Darkrai, have Smeargle sketch Dark Void, and then bring that Smeargle to the World Championships.
And suddenly during the VGC 2016 season, the metagame broke in half. Smeargle was on almost every single top-cut team.
The strategy was suffocating. Smeargle would be sent out on turn 1, spamming Dark Void to put both opponents to sleep. And to make matters worse, players combine this with Smeargle's hidden ability called Moody.
Oh no, Moody. Explain how chaotic Moody is.
At the end of every turn, the Moody ability activates. A random number generator selects one of the Pokemon's core stats, attack, defense, speed, evasion, or accuracy, and raises it by 2 multiplier stages. It then selects another stat and lowers it by 1 stage. It introduces pure, uncontrollable variance into a strategy game.
So let's paint the picture for the listener. Turn 1. Smeargle puts both of your Pokemon to sleep with Dark Void. You can't play the game. At the end of the turn, Moody activates. Maybe it randomly boosts Smeargle's speed, guaranteeing it will move before your next turn. Or maybe it boosts its evasion, meaning even if you wake up, your attacks will mathematically miss. Or, the most terrifying outcome, Moody randomly boosts its accuracy.
A single accuracy boost overrides the 80% base accuracy of Dark Void. The move becomes a guaranteed 100% hit rate. It completely erased the only mathematical drawback the move possessed.
And while your team is napping, Smeargle's partner, which in 2016 was usually an apocalyptic god-tier Pokemon like Primal Groudon or Xerneas, is freely setting up stat-boosting moves to sweep your entire team. It was a miserable viewer experience. The entire competitive landscape centralized around this one gimmicky dog painting your team to sleep.
The community outcry was immense. The strategy was universally despised because it removed skill and relied on the RNG of sleep turns and Moody stat boosts. So, moving into Generation 7, Sun and Moon Game Freak recognized they had to intervene. They had to nerf the strategy. But the implementation of this nerf is what makes it a profound tragedy for Darkrai.
They brought the hammer down.
They executed a 2-pronged nerf. The first step was incredibly elegant. They hard-coded Dark Void within the game's engine so that if the move was selected by any Pokemon other than Darkrai, the move would simply fail. The text box would read, "but it failed." This completely eliminated the Smeargle loophole. Smeargle could sketch the move, but it could no longer cast it.
Which is the perfect fix. Smeargle goes back to being a useless painting dog, and Darkrai gets to keep its cool, powerful signature move for people playing the single-player campaigns. Everyone is happy, right?
One would assume, but Game Freak, perhaps out of an overabundance of caution, applied a second, entirely unnecessary nerf. They altered the base accuracy of Dark Void itself. They dropped it from a reliable 80% down to a catastrophic 50%.
50%. Let's put that in perspective for the listener. If you are playing a complex turn-based strategy game like chess, but every time you try to move your queen, you have to flip a coin, If it's tails, your turn is skipped. That isn't strategy, that is a desperate gamble. A 50% hit chance in competitive Pokemon means the move is mathematically unplayable.
It is statistically worse than Hypnosis, the generic sleep move we mentioned earlier, which has 60% accuracy. The developers made Darkrai's legendary signature move mathematically inferior to a common attack it already learns naturally by leveling up.
It is the ultimate workplace injustice. It is exactly like having a completely incompetent coworker. Let's call him Smeargle. Smeargle steals your brilliant PowerPoint presentation, goes into the boardroom, completely botches the delivery, offends the CEO, and ruins the company's quarter. The boss comes out of the boardroom furious. And who does he fire?
Right.
He fires you. Darkrai got severely punished for crimes committed by Smeargle. Dark Void was rendered utterly useless.
It is a deep mechanical irony. The creature known as the Master of Nightmares became the ultimate victim of a developer nightmare. The balancing team overcorrected so drastically that they effectively erased Dark Void's utility from the franchise. For an entire decade, Darkrai lost its identity in battle. It went from being a terrifying presence that forced opponents to respect the sleep threat to a generic, fast attacker that had to rely on standard moves to survive.
It languished in mediocrity. But, and this is the massive payoff we've been building toward the story, does not end there, because the newly detailed DLC for the upcoming Legends, ZA game, titled the Mega Dimension DLC, finally steps in to give the Pitch-Black Pokémon the terrifying, awe-inspiring cosmic renaissance it deserves.
Indeed, the Mega Dimension DLC completely revitalizes Darkrai, both narratively and mechanically. It abandons the tragic, misunderstood defender trope entirely and fully embraces the concept of unchecked, eldritch, cosmic horror.
Let's set the stage for this, because the lore here requires a bit of Kalos region history. The Legends. ZA game takes place in Lumiose City. To understand the DLC, you have to understand Mega Energy.
In the deep lore of the Kalos region, there was a devastating war 3,000 years ago. To end this war, a king created the ultimate weapon, which was powered by the literal life force of Pokemon. The residual energy from this weaponized life force is what the modern Pokemon world refers to as Mega Energy, the energy that allows certain Pokemon to achieve Mega Evolution.
It is highly volatile, radioactive life force. Now, in the narrative climax of the base Legends, ZA game, there is a massive machine situated atop the iconic Prism Tower in the center of Lumiose City, known as the Ange device. This device malfunctions or is sabotaged, and it releases a catastrophic, localized explosion of raw Mega Energy.
And positioning is everything. In the post-game DLC narrative, it is revealed that Darkrai was residing in the shadows near the apex of Prism Tower when the Ange device detonated. Darkrai is caught directly in the blast radius and absorbs a lethal influx of this excess Mega Energy.
But because Darkrai isn't holding a compatible Megastone, the catalyst usually required to control this energy safely, the reaction goes horribly wrong.
It triggers a phenomenon the game classifies as a rogue Mega Evolution.
Which is terrifying. When we think of Mega Evolution, we usually think of a fun anime power-up powered by the bond of friendship between a trainer and their Pokemon. Rogue Mega Evolution is the dark mirror of that.
It is described in the lore as a mutated state of constant agonizing pain. The massive influx of weaponized life energy causes Darkrai's latent powers to expand exponentially, entirely beyond the creature's conscious control.
And let's remember what Darkrai's latent power is. Its passive ability is to project nightmares. If that power is suddenly magnified by 1,000 and stripped of all control, the nightmares stop being psychological. They start manifesting physically in the real world.
The game introduces a localized dimensional anomaly known as hyperspace Lumiose. The raw Mega Energy fuels Darkrai's subconscious terrors, creating an alternate physical dreamscape dimension built from the collective fears of the city's inhabitants. This nightmare dimension physically begins to bleed into and merge with the real Lumiose City. Buildings warp, gravity fails, and the city threatens to be swallowed whole into an endless, tangible nightmare.
So as the player, you are tasked with stopping this cosmic collapse. How do you deal with a localized apocalypse caused by a supercharged god of darkness? The answer is the most beautifully absurd, deeply Pokemon solution imaginable. You team up with an underground organization called Team MZ, you work with a girl named Ancha, you find the mythical Pokemon Hoopa, who has the power to open portals through dimensions using its golden rings, and you bake a donut.
Not just any donut. The sources specify it is a bad dreams crawler.
I cannot get over the tonal whiplash of this franchise. You are facing a Lovecraftian nightmare dimension that is tearing apart reality, and the tactical solution is to feed a magically infused, nightmare-flavored pastry to a mischievous genie so it will open a portal for you to go fight God. It is peak Pokemon logic.
It perfectly balances the high-stakes cosmic horror with the inherent whimsy that defines the brand. However, once Hoopa eats the cruller and opens the hyperspace portal, the whimsy evaporates instantly. You step into the nightmare dimension and are confronted with the physical manifestation of Mega Darkrai. And the visual design team held nothing back. They leaned entirely into the Eldritch aesthetic.
It is genuinely grotesque. Base Darkrai is this sleek, shadowy humanoid phantom. Mega Darkrai completely abandons the humanoid form. It transforms into a 3.0-meter tall, 240-kilogram entity that is essentially a giant singular glowing eyeball encased in a mass of floating pitch-black tendrils. It looked like a biblically accurate angel corrupted by the void.
And this horrific redesign is perfectly reflected in its new competitive statistics. The mechanical shift alters how Darkrai functions on a fundamental level. In its standard form, Darkrai is a classic glass cannon. It relies on its incredible 125 base speed to hit hard and fast before taking damage, because its defensive stats are relatively frail.
But when it undergoes Rogue Mega Evolution, that speed vanishes. Its speed stat plummets from 125 down to 85. In competitive terms, 85 speed is practically a crawl. It will almost always move second in high-level play. So if it loses its speed, where does all that excess mega energy go?
It goes into an impenetrable bulk and world-ending power. Both its defense and special defense stats skyrocket to an incredible base 130. To put that in perspective, it becomes as bulky as dedicated defensive walls like Umbreon or Dusknoir. It can absorb massive, super effective hits without flinching.
It just floats there, absorbing your attacks with its giant eyeball.
Yeah.
But the truly terrifying metric is its offensive capability. Its special attack stat jumps to a staggering 165.
For context for the listener, Mewtwo, the original standard for overwhelming psychic power in the franchise, has a special attack of 154. Mega Darkrai significantly outpaces it. Every attack it launches hits with the force of a localized meteor strike.
And the crowning achievement of this DLC, the thing that made the competitive community cheer, is that Game Freak finally issued a mechanical apology for the Smeargle incident. They fixed Dark Void.
Yes. Within the unique battle system of Legends, ZA Dark Void is no longer a mathematically broken 50% accuracy sleep move. The developers completely reworked the code. It is now a highly accurate 60 base power Dark-type attacking move. Crucially, upon dealing damage, it inherently inflicts the drowsiness status condition on the target.
Which is a brilliant compromise.
Yeah.
Drowsiness slows the opponent down and makes them take more damage, but it doesn't completely remove their ability to play the game like the old sleep mechanic did. It successfully restores Dark Void's utility. It makes it a terrifying core part of Mega Darkrai's offensive kit without risking a return to the completely broken centralized mechanics of the VGC 2016 era.
It is the ultimate realization of what Darkrai was always meant to be, and this new era of cosmic horror extends beyond the video games. The Pokemon trading card game, the TCG, is absolutely capitalizing on this resurgence.
The sources outline the upcoming sets, right?
Correct. The upcoming Japanese TCG set, titled Abyssai, and its corresponding English localization, Pitch-Black, heavily feature Mega Darkrai as the chase card, and this continues a very long historic legacy of Darkrai, receiving some of the most mechanically unique and rule-breaking cards in the game's history.
You're referring to the old legend cards from the Heart Gold and Soul Silver era. Those were wild.
They were completely unprecedented. There was a specific card titled Darkrai and Cresselia Legend. It was a massive piece of interconnected artwork that was physically split across two separate playing cards. To even put it on your bench, you had to hold both the top half and bottom half cards in your hand simultaneously and play them as a single unit.
Which is already breaking the rules of standard card placement.
Furthermore, its primary attack, named Lost Crisis, interacted specifically with the Lost Zone. The Lost Zone is a mechanic in the TCG representing a dimensional void separate from the discard pile. Cards sent to the Lost Zone can never be retrieved or resurrected for the remainder of the match. Darkrai has perpetually been associated with mechanics that manipulate the fundamental underlying rules of whatever game it inhabits.
Because, fundamentally, it is the king of darkness. A king does not abide by the rules of the peasants. A king makes his own rules. Whether it is tearing open the rendering code of the Nintendo DS to walk through the void, casting psychic illusions to pose as a human tournament champion, or absorbing the weaponized life force of Kalos to create alternate dimensions of tangible fear. Darkrai bends the universe to its will. So let's zoom out and look at the sheer scale of the journey we've just been on. We started in the murky, unhygienic realities of the Middle Ages, unpacking the Polish plate and the Greco-Roman god of nightmares.
Right, a long way from Kalos.
We journeyed to New Moon Island, analyzing the tragic, self-imposed quarantine of a biological hazard, and faced the lethal, heartbreaking realities of the strange house in Unova. We saw Darkrai manipulate the timeline in the Mystery Dungeon spin-offs and construct dictatorial utopias in Pokepark. We navigated the broken hexadecimal abyss of the Generation 4 tweaking glitch, raged at the Smeargle-induced nerfs that unjustly ruined its signature move, and finally we faced down a 240-kilogram Eldritch Cosmic Eyeball in the hyperspace of Lumnio City.
When you synthesize all of these disparate sources, a cohesive picture emerges. Darkrai isn't just a monster designed to scare children. It is a profound, multi-layered narrative about the burden of unintentional power. It is a creature perpetually feared for what it inherently is, rather than judged for what it intends to be. Its isolation is a tragedy, but its raw power is an undeniable cosmic terror.
It is the ultimate anti-hero, mastermind, and victim, all rolled into one pitch-black package. If you loved exploring these paradoxes, the deep lore, and the hidden mechanics of Darkrai, make sure you head over to Decoding the Dark. It's a fantastic channel that dives into the exact kind of high-level mysteries and narrative analysis we'd love unpacking here. Support them, subscribe, and keep your curiosity alive.
As we conclude our deep dive today, synthesizing everything we've learned from the lore, I want to leave you with a final lingering thought, a question to ponder. We know from the core mechanics that Darkrai uses its Bad Dreams ability, its projection of nightmares, as a defense mechanism. It involuntarily casts these horrific visions outward to keep predators and threats away, to protect its isolation. But consider the psychology of a defense mechanism. It only triggers when the creature feels threatened. If Darkrai is the undisputed master of dreams, the king of darkness, and it only projects nightmares when it feels overwhelmed by something lurking in the shadows, what on earth is the pitch-black Pokémon seeing in the dark that scares it so much?